It started with a message that could have meant anything. But in my gut, I knew it meant everything. I still remember the way my breath caught when I saw it. A soft buzz from my husband's phone, the screen lighting up in the early morning. Gloom. I hadn't meant to look. I wasn't snooping. I was just brushing my teeth, a normal morning routine in our shared ensuite bathroom in Asheville. The phone was face up, a simple preview. Can't wait for another weekend at the Cape. Bring the red one, that was it. No name attached, no emojis, no kiss. But I didn't need any of that to understand what it was, or rather, who it was. Somewhere in the back of my throat, toothpaste foam turned bitter. I'm Ava Morgan, 36. Real estate strategist for a boutique investment firm. I don't do drama. I've built my life on composure, clarity, and control. The wife of a freelance photographer, Ethan Morgan. We'd been married for 8 years, 12 together, and for a long time, I believed we were the exception to the rule. The couple that didn't just survive time, but grew stronger through it. That morning shattered that belief with a single sentence. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I rinsed my mouth, finished brushing my teeth, and stared at myself in the mirror. Not to fix my eyeliner, but because I needed to find the woman inside who knew what to do next. Ethan was still in bed. Or pretending to be. He always waited until I got out first, until the house was warmed by coffee and silence. He said it was because I was the morning person. But the truth, he stopped waking up beside me long ago. I walked back into the bedroom. He stirred, smiling with practiced ease. "Early call today?" he asked, his voice still thick from sleep. "Yeah," I said, sitting at the edge of the bed, eyes on the floor. "Client wants a sunrise walkthrough of that Blue Ridge property." He stretched. "You work too hard." The irony didn't go unnoticed. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because deep inside, a new instinct had risen. Not of fury, but of calculation. I needed to be sure. I needed more than a gut feeling and a text message. The game had started, and I wasn't about to play blind. Ethan and I weren't always like this. We met at a gallery opening in New York. He was charming, wide-eyed, curious. I was direct, ambitious, already mapping out a 10-year plan. We balanced each other. Or, so I thought. Our first home in Asheville was supposed to be a refuge from the chaos of the city. Mountain views, weekend hikes, slow wine-filled dinners. But somewhere between his freelance projects and my 15-hour workdays, the silence became sharp, not hostile, not explosive, just unfamiliar. He began traveling more, always for work. New shoots, new models, new visions. He was passionate again, just not with me. He started locking his phone. New passcodes, new passwords. Our shared calendar went empty. When I asked about dates, he was vague. Might be in Charleston next weekend. Or maybe Savannah, depends on the client. The first time he forgot our anniversary, I convinced myself he was overwhelmed. The second time, I convinced myself I was. But that morning, with that message glowing in my memory like a scar, I stopped making excuses. I started watching. I didn't have to wait long. That weekend, Ethan said he'd be away for a shoot, fashion photography at a private rental on Cape Hatteras. Funny, he didn't mention any clients by name. He didn't even take his main camera bag. What he did pack, a bottle of her favorite wine, I recognized the label, a silk robe I hadn't seen before, and an overnight duffel with no tripod gear. Inside. I didn't say a word. I kissed him goodbye. I watched him walk to the car, and then I sat down at my desk, opened his laptop, which had auto-saved browsing history, and searched the email that matched the initials from his text preview, SH Sienna. Hail, that name sent a chill straight through me. Sienna was no mystery woman. She was a marketing executive I'd met once, briefly, at a fundraising gala Ethan had photographed. Elegant, tall, wore vintage perfume and tailored jackets. Not young, not naive. She was married too, and she had looked at Ethan that night with eyes I should have recognized. I found her LinkedIn, her address in Savannah, and then I found him. Julian Hale, 42, importer, owner of a boutique wine label in Sonoma, married for 13 years, had spoken on a business panel I once attended, a man who had no idea what his wife was doing on weekends. That's when it stopped being a suspicion and became a pattern. A game played behind closed doors while we, the spouses, kept the homes warm and respectable. I spent that night combing through old receipts, Uber trips from Ethan's phone bill, hotel charges masked as creative retreat expenses. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a one-time fling. This was a life he had built, carefully and deliberately, in the shadows of ours. And I knew, with every quiet breath I took, that I would not let it continue. But I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to show up. 3 days later, I sat alone at a coffee shop in Charleston, fingers hovering over the keyboard of my phone. My heart was hammering so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The message I was about to send would change everything. Hi, Julian. I know we've never spoken, but I believe your wife and my husband are having an affair. I have proof. Would you be open to meeting in private? I attached the screenshots, the wine receipt, the itinerary to Cape Hatteras, and I hit send. For the first time in weeks, I felt something solid inside me. Not rage, not despair, power, control, choice. Julian responded within the hour. At first, he asked for clarification. Thought maybe it was spam. But the moment I mentioned Ethan's full name and the location of their next getaway, he changed his tone. Can we meet halfway? Charleston works for me. Saturday at 10? I agreed. When I walked into that cafe, I didn't know what to expect. A broken man? An angry husband? Someone ready to lash out? What I found was a tall, quiet man in a navy coat, sipping black coffee with eyes that held storms. He looked at me, not like I was a stranger, but like I was the only other person in the world who understood the depth of this betrayal. I slid my phone across the table and let him see everything. He didn't say a word for nearly 10 minutes. Just scrolled. Read. And when he finally looked up, his voice was calm. I thought, we were just distant, he said. I thought maybe it was stress. I nodded. Same. We sat for an hour, not planning revenge, but trying to breathe through the weight of reality. And then, slowly, the pieces of something much stronger began to fall into place. We formed a pact, not one of fury, not even justice, but of truth. We would meet them, together, at the beach house they had chosen to desecrate. We would be there first. We wouldn't yell. We wouldn't break things. We would simply be there when they walked in, when they saw us, when every lie they'd told themselves came crashing down in the silence of that room. And that's exactly what we plan to do. If this story has you hooked so far, don't forget to hit subscribe. Your support helps us bring more emotional, powerful, and true-to-life stories like this one to light. We've only just begun, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Quiz time. Comment below. If you were Ava, what would you do after seeing that text message? A. Confront Ethan right away. B. Stay quiet and collect more evidence, like Ava did. Comment A or B below. I'm curious to see how many of you would react calmly versus confrontationally. Let's see who's Team Ava. It was a strange thing, sitting across from a man I'd never met, bonded instantly by the same pain. Julian Hale was exactly what I expected, and somehow nothing like it. There was something quietly formidable about him. Not aggressive, not wounded in the obvious sense, but contained, like someone holding a full glass of rage steady so it wouldn't spill. I wondered what I looked like to him. A composed, successful woman who had just discovered that her marriage wasn't built on partnership, but on pretense. I remember the silence that filled our small table in the corner of that Charleston cafe. We were surrounded by life. Waiters, hustling, coffee cups clinking, someone laughing too loudly at the bar. It was all background noise to the truth spreading out between us, message by message, photo by photo. I had arranged everything into a folder on my phone. Chronological, labeled, factual. Not for drama, but for clarity. Julian studied every detail, barely blinking. When he reached the receipt, a dinner reservation at the Dock House in Cape E. Hatteras, set for the same weekend Ethan claimed to be in Charlotte. Julian let out a single breath, almost like a sigh, but heavier. I watched his hand tighten around the coffee cup. She said she was going on a wellness retreat with her team, he murmured. A silence-focused leadership seminar. I even packed her suitcase. I didn't respond. What was there to say to that? What response could soften that kind of betrayal? Instead, I leaned back slightly and said the only thing that felt honest. Now we both know. He nodded once, slow. What now? The question hung in the air between us, not rhetorical, but entirely literal. What now? What did people like us, betrayed, humiliated, discarded, do after the curtain of denial was finally ripped down? Did we confront, scream, forgive, walk away? I looked out the window for a long moment before answering. They're staying, at a place Ethan and I used to go to. We bought it together before we got married. A beach house on the Outer Banks, Cape Hatteras. Quiet, private, set back in the dunes. He probably thinks I won't check, that I'm too busy with work to notice. Julian ran a hand over his jaw, the shadow of stubble catching the morning light. She doesn't know I keep the tracking info on her car. She thinks I got rid of it after we had that fight 2 years ago. But I didn't. There was something almost shameful in his tone, but I didn't judge him. We all have our ways of coping when we suspect we're being lied to. What if we're there first? I asked, not entirely knowing where the idea came from, but it came fully formed. What if we don't stop them or ambush them, but just wait? His eyes narrowed slightly. Wait? We'll sit there, I continued, my voice finding a strange calm. No yelling, no confrontation, just presence, just us. Let them walk in and see the truth. No more hiding, no more manipulation. Just two people facing the reality they tried so hard to bury. Julian stared at me like he was studying an abstract painting. I could almost see the calculation behind. His eyes, the risk, the meaning, the purpose. You're serious, he said. Not a question, but an observation. I'm done being lied to, I answered. And I think you are too. He didn't respond right away. Just leaned back, arms crossed, gaze thoughtful. And then, finally, he nodded. Okay. But we do this on our terms. No threats, no chaos. Just the truth. We sat there for another hour, drinking coffee that had long since gone cold, outlining the steps like a blueprint. We would drive up separately. I would arrive Saturday morning. He'd come later that afternoon. I still had a spare key to the house. Julian had packed clothes and a few items under the pretense of a weekend trip to Atlanta. It felt surreal, like we were writing a script for a movie neither of us had auditioned for. But this wasn't fiction. This was our lives. Before we left, The cafe. Julian looked at me and said something I'll never forget. You know, I used to think silence was what saved relationships, that when things got tough, you just pushed through it quietly and trusted it would pass. He looked down at the phone in his hand. Now I realize silence is what allowed the rot to grow. The weight of that truth stayed with me long after we parted ways that day. I spent the next 24 hours going through the motions of my life, taking meetings, checking listings, walking through properties with clients who had no idea my world was collapsing beneath my feet. I smiled. I shook hands. I scheduled inspections and appraisals. And then I went home and stared at a wall, unsure if I wanted to scream or sleep or run. But I did none of those things. Instead, I packed. Didn't take much. Just a change of clothes, my laptop, a folder with every piece of evidence I'd collected, and a small leather notebook I hadn't written in for years. It had been a gift from Ethan, back when we still exchanged meaningful presents. You should write more, he'd said. You have that thing, that quiet voice people trust. I had written once, pages filled with dreams, fears, future baby names. And then I stopped. Somewhere around the time Ethan started disappearing on weekends. Now, for the first time in years, I opened it again, and I wrote. A letter to myself. The version of me who had once believed love was unconditional, who had believed a strong woman never walked away. I told her the truth, that love without respect is just a cage lined with roses, that there is no prize for endurance in a loveless marriage, that clarity, not loyalty, is the first virtue of survival. That night I slept without dreams. Saturday morning arrived with a sky so clear it felt unnatural. I drove east with the windows down, the air crisp with early spring. The closer I got to the coast, the more I felt something inside me shifting. Not anger, not sorrow, but release. The time I reached the beach house, I didn't feel fear. I felt ready. The house hadn't changed. Same weathered gray shingles, same squeaky porch step, same old welcome mat that read, "Come as you are." The irony didn't escape me. I unlocked the door. Inside, everything was still in place. A bottle of red wine sat on the counter, unopened. 2 wine glasses waited on the sideboard. I wondered if Ethan had sent someone ahead to prepare the place, or maybe he'd done it himself, trying to make everything perfect for a weekend, drenched in infidelity. I wandered through the rooms, fingers brushing the edge of the sofa we'd once picked out together. I paused at the bedroom door, closed for now, and walked into the sunroom instead, setting my bag down beside the window that faced the sea. An hour later, Julian arrived. He didn't knock. He just walked in like he belonged there, because, in some twisted way, he did. He carried a duffel bag and a small wooden box. "I brought this," he said, opening the lid to reveal an old bottle of wine with a handwritten label. "It's the first vintage I ever imported. She loved it." We set it on the table without a word. We didn't talk much after that. Instead, we worked together in silence, setting the table for 4, placing a candle in the middle, adjusting the lighting just enough so their expressions would be perfectly visible. At one point, I caught Julian looking at a photograph still pinned to the fridge. It was of Ethan and me from 4 years ago, laughing on the deck during a thunderstorm. I reached over and took it down, folding it neatly into my bag. "Was it a good moment?" Julian asked, his voice quiet. "Yes," I said. "But even good. Moments can't save something that's already hollow." He nodded, and then said something I hadn't expected. "She wanted a child. We tried, twice. Failed both times. After that, she stopped bringing it up. I didn't know what to say, so I offered the only truth I had. I was pregnant once. Lost it in this house." Julian looked at me, eyes soft. He didn't offer pity. just presence. And that was enough. As the day gave way to dusk, we sat on opposite sides of the room, waiting. Not for drama, not for redemption, but for truth. Because sometimes, silence isn't what kills us. It's what finally sets us free. It's a strange thing, preparing a space not for comfort, but for confrontation. Not to welcome, but to witness. By the time the sun stretched fully across the dunes, Julian and I had already made the place look perfect. Not in the way Ethan and Sienna intended, of course, not for pleasure, not for romance, but for something more intimate than either of them had planned. For the kind of raw, unadorned honesty they had spent months, maybe years, avoiding. Julian was meticulous. He arranged the chairs like a stage director laying out his final act. 2 seats facing the window, the other 2 facing the door. No way for them to walk in without seeing us first. No chance to hide. He placed the wine bottle, the one Sienna had once said was better than anything in Napa, right at the center of the table. 4 glasses, 4 coasters. Every detail carefully set, like a photo waiting to be taken. A kind of symmetry you only notice when everything is about to break. I found myself caught in a loop of emotions I hadn't expected to feel. There was no rush of satisfaction, no smug sense of revenge, only a deep, marrow-level exhaustion, like I'd been holding up a collapsing ceiling for too long and had finally decided to let it fall. Julian seemed calm, but I knew he was holding himself together, through sheer will. At one point, he sat on the edge of the kitchen island, staring at a small painting on the wall. I'd forgotten it was even there. A watercolor we bought in Charleston years ago. A woman standing alone in a storm, holding her coat closed with one hand while the wind blew her hair wild. He pointed at it, his voice low. "Funny. She looks more like you than I remembered." I smiled, thin and tired. I used to think she looked like who I wanted to be. Now I think she looks like someone who knows exactly what she's walking away from. Neither of us replied to that. Some truths don't need echoing. That afternoon passed in a quiet rhythm. We moved without needing to speak, as if we'd been preparing for this moment all our lives. I wiped down the counters, lit a few candles, not for ambiance, but for clarity. Julian wrote something on a piece of paper and tucked it into the envelope we planned to leave on the table. I didn't ask what it was. Outside, the light shifted slowly into amber. The wind picked up, brushing against the side of the house like breath on glass. I sat in the sunroom for a while, notebook in hand, writing another entry in the letter to myself. You are not here to win. You are here to witness. And sometimes, witnessing is the bravest thing we can do. I closed the notebook and looked over at Julian, who had pulled out a small sketch pad and was drawing. Something abstract, minimal, but deliberate. We were 2 people who had nothing, left to prove and everything to let go of. Around 5, we made dinner. It felt absurd at first, but it was something human, grounding. I made a spinach and goat cheese salad with walnuts. Julian seared 2 fillets and poured the wine we knew neither of us would drink. We set the plates on the side table, untouched. We weren't hungry, but we needed the act of preparing. It reminded us we still had agency, that even in the face of betrayal, we were still capable of building something, even if it was just a meal neither of us would eat. At 5:30, I checked the security app on my phone. Ethan's car was less than an hour away. Julian nodded when I showed him the screen. "Showtime," he said softly. We turned off the music, adjusted the lights one last time. The house grew quiet, almost reverent. Then we sat down, side by side, facing the front door like an audience waiting for the final scene. I looked around the room, every object now a symbol. The wine glasses, the folded photograph I had put away, the envelope thick with receipts, messages, timestamps, evidence, yes, but more than that, memory. Julian reached into his coat pocket and placed a silver ring on the table. "She gave it to me on our 10-year anniversary," he said. "It was engraved. For always." I nodded. I didn't offer sympathy. I didn't need to. In that house, in that moment, we understood each other without needing to name the pain. At 5:52 p.m., we heard the tires crunching over gravel. Julian straightened his jacket. I smoothed the crease on my jeans, and then we waited. I heard the car doors open. Muffled voices, laughter. They were laughing. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel fury. Just stillness. The front door creaked open. Sienna stepped in first, bouquet in hand, her face glowing with anticipation. Her gaze landed on me, and for a moment, she didn't register what she was seeing. Then her smile cracked. Julian stood slowly. Ethan came in behind her, carrying a gift bag. His face shifted from confusion to recognition to horror in a matter of seconds. The bag slipped from his fingers, hitting the hardwood with a dull thud. A bottle of champagne rolled out, cracked, and bled foam onto the floor. No one moved. No one spoke. The air was thick with shock, the kind of silence you could scream into and still hear nothing but your own heartbeat. Finally, I spoke. "Welcome to your weekend." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Ava, this isn't..." I tilted my head. "You were going to say, 'This isn't what it looks like,' right? Because that line's been used so many times it's practically a chorus." Sienna turned toward Julian. "I didn't know, I didn't expect..." Julian cut her off with a raised hand. "Don't. Not yet." He walked to the table, picked up the envelope, and opened it. He didn't hand it to her. He simply laid it flat across the table and flipped it open. "Everything you've tried to hide is in here. Dates, hotel bills, voice messages, including the one where you told your assistant to say you'd be unreachable this weekend." Sienna's eyes filled, but she said nothing. Ethan took a step forward, toward me. "Ava, please. We can talk about this." I met his eyes. "You've had months to talk. This isn't about talking anymore. This is about watching. Watching what you've done. Watching who you became when you thought I wasn't looking." His lips parted, but no words came out. Julian turned to Sienna. "You said you needed space, that we were growing apart, that you wanted clarity." He pointed around the room. "Well, here it is." Sienna sank into a chair. Her face was pale. Her hands shook. Ethan remained standing, angry, embarrassed, defensive. I placed the second folder on the table, the one with the divorce documents. I had filed earlier that week. Every asset accounted for, every transaction traced. Nothing left to divide but the space between us. "You can refuse to sign them," I said, "but I won't change my mind." No one answered. The ocean beyond the window whispered its steady rhythm, like a soundtrack to the unraveling of a lie. And somewhere in the quiet, I realized this wasn't just a confrontation. It was a funeral. A funeral for the life I thought I had. For the promises that once felt sacred. For the belief that love, by itself, could ever be enough. Julian finally looked up. "To be honest, I didn't come here expecting closure," he said. "But I did come for truth. And now that I've seen it, I think that's enough." I stood, slowly, the weight lifting from my shoulders in pieces. Ethan looked at me, his face crumbling into something pitiful. "I never wanted to hurt you," I nodded once. "But you did." And then I turned, walked toward the porch, and stepped outside into the evening air. Julian followed moments later, the screen door creaking behind him. We didn't speak. We just stood there side by side, As the sky shifted into dusk and the wind swept across the dunes like a hush falling over the wreckage. Inside, the light still glowed. Inside, they were left with each other, and the truth neither of them could escape. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt light. Not because it was over, but because I was done. The wind had picked up by the time Julian and I stepped back, inside. There was something colder about the air now, heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension and were holding it in, waiting for someone to name it. Ethan and Sienna were still seated, but the dynamic had changed. Sienna looked small in the armchair, her hands tangled in her lap, staring down at the rug as if trying to disappear into it. Ethan, on the other hand, remained standing, shoulders rigid, eyes darting between me and the thick envelope of evidence on the table, like he still believed he could salvage some part of his dignity if he just chose the right words. But it was too late for dignity, too late for saving, too late for lies that had already rotted at the root. I sat across from Ethan without looking away. Julian remained beside me, calm, silent, composed. The kind of silence that says more than shouting ever could. "I'm not going to drag this out," I said softly. "There's no power left in either of you pretending anymore." Ethan opened his mouth, but I raised a hand before he could speak. "You don't get to rewrite the truth. Not in this house. Not in front of me. Not after everything." I pulled out the second folder I had prepared. Not just photos and messages, but everything I had kept hidden over the years. The credit card statements I'd paid off in silence. The emails I intercepted when he forgot to log out. The time I followed him without him ever knowing, just to see if my instincts were right. They always were. I laid it all out in front of him. He didn't touch it. "Do you remember when we kept separate accounts?" I asked, my voice measured. "You used to tell your friends it was because we respected each other's independence." He didn't answer. I continued. "What you never told them was that you once lost over $30,000 gambling. That your parents bailed you out quietly so your career wouldn't suffer. That I was the one who put boundaries in place, not out of distrust, but because I couldn't afford to trust you blindly anymore." Sienna looked up then, startled. Julian turned to her slowly. "Did you know that?" he asked. "Did you know the man you've been sleeping with isn't just a liar, but also someone who once nearly bankrupted his marriage while playing poker with college buddies in Asheville?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Ethan's jaw twitched. "That has nothing to do with—" "It has everything to do with it," I said, sharper this time. "Because you didn't just cheat on me. You lied every day, in every way. About where you were. About who you were. You didn't fall in love, Ethan. You built an escape route." He looked down, shame crawling across his face like a slow, wet stain. Julian exhaled slowly and turned back toward Sienna. "I asked you last year if you wanted counseling," he said. "You said no. Said you just needed space. That maybe we should give each other a break. What you didn't say was that you had already checked out of the marriage, that you were sleeping with a man whose wife had just lost a child in the house you were now using like a vacation rental." Sienna's face went pale. She looked at me with wide, broken eyes. "I didn't know. I didn't know what happened here," she whispered. "Of course you didn't," I said, "because that would have required you to see me as human." No one moved. The wine sat untouched on the table. The glass Ethan had, poured earlier, now looked ridiculous. Part of a performance that had failed before the curtain even rose. Julian stood then, slowly, deliberately, and walked toward the window. He looked out over the dunes, the ocean beyond darkening under a bruised sky. "We didn't come here for revenge," he said, still facing the sea. "We came here to end the lies." He turned back toward Sienna, his face unreadable. but I think it's only fair that you be the one to finish this. You owe me that much." Sienna's lips trembled. Her fingers clawed the fabric of her sweater. "There's something I haven't told you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I didn't know how to say." Julian's eyes narrowed. "Now seems like a good time." She looked down, then back up, and then to me. "I'm pregnant," she said. The silence that followed wasn't a pause. It was a rupture. Ethan stood bolt upright. "What?" She nodded, slowly, tears clinging to her lashes. "I found out last week. I was going to tell you." She looked at Ethan. "This weekend. But then—" She trailed off. Julian didn't move. His entire body seemed suspended in disbelief. "Is it mine?" he asked, his voice suddenly raw. Sienna looked at him. For a long moment, I saw something honest break through her shame. "Yes," she said. "I'm sure. We hadn't. Ethan and I always used protection." Julian closed his eyes. I thought he might collapse, but instead, he steadied himself with a single hand on the window frame, the other clenched into a fist so tight it shook. Ethan looked at her like she had just betrayed him. "You're keeping it?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. She flinched. "Yes," she whispered. "It wasn't planned, but I'm not going to run from it." The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. Ethan, the man who cheated on his wife in the same house, where she once mourned a child, now standing there looking betrayed. I stood then, not in anger, in finality. "This ends now," I said. I walked to the table, picked up the divorce folder, and placed it directly in front of Ethan. "My lawyer has everything. Our assets have been moved. My name is off the cabin. You can keep your lies. I'm taking back my life." He looked at me with bloodshot eyes. "Ava, please, don't throw everything away. We were happy once." "No," I said, calm and cold. "I was happy once. You were just careful." Julian turned back from the window. His eyes were still damp, but his voice had regained its steadiness. "I don't know what happens next," he said to Sienna. "But if you're having this child, I'll take responsibility. The child didn't ask for any of this." Sienna nodded, tears falling freely now. "Thank you," she said. "I know I don't deserve it." Julian didn't respond. He just looked at her like a man who had once built a cathedral only to watch it crumble from the inside out. Ethan stepped forward again. "Ava, you're just angry." "I'm not angry," I interrupted. "I'm clear, and clarity is something you've avoided for years." I took a breath, then turned to both of them. "You don't love each other. You love what the other person represents. A way out, a temporary thrill, a mirror to your own self-loathing. And that's fine. But don't call it love." They said nothing, because they knew I was right. Julian and I gathered our things in silence. There was nothing more to say. The truth had arrived, brutal and undeniable. As we walked out the door, I glanced back one last time. Ethan sat slumped on the edge of the couch, his hands in his hair. Sienna curled into herself in the armchair, her hand gently resting on the place where something new had begun, a life that hadn't asked to be born out of a betrayal. Outside, the ocean howled against the wind, and we kept walking. It's been 6 months since the night everything changed. And yet, sometimes, I still feel like I'm standing in that doorway, watching Ethan's world collapse, watching Sienna cradle the consequences of her choices, and realizing I had finally, irrevocably, stepped out of a life that was never built for the woman I've become. But what I didn't expect was this. Peace doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly. It comes in the stillness after you've done something hard, something necessary. It arrives in the morning light, in the absence of dread, in the sudden realization that you've stopped checking your phone for excuses someone never owed you in the first place. I live now in a small cottage on the coast of Bar Harbor, Maine. It's nothing grand, but it's mine. There's a wraparound porch where the breeze smells of salt and pine, a writing desk by the window, a kettle that whistles too loudly when it boils. I keep lavender on the porch and grow rosemary in the kitchen. For years, I used to dream about a life like this, and then I convinced myself it was impractical, too sentimental, too far from who I was supposed to be. But now I understand. Sometimes the dream doesn't change. You do. You stop apologizing for it. I left the real estate firm a few weeks after the confrontation. I didn't need to. I was good at what I did, and my team respected me. But something inside me knew that to fully start over, I had to loosen the grip I had on every version of myself that kept me rooted in the past. I now work as an independent consultant, helping newly divorced women manage the financial labyrinth of starting over. Not just spreadsheets and settlements, but the emotional undercurrents of money. Fear, control, shame, hope. Clients come to me not because I have a dazzling resume, but because I sit across from them as someone who understands, who doesn't flinch when they say, "I thought I was the problem," or "I don't even know how to begin again." They trust me because they know I've stood exactly where they are, shaking but still standing. Julian and I keep in touch. Not every week, not even every month, but with a consistency that defies the labels we never gave each other. Sometimes it's a quick message. Saw this wine and thought of you. Or a photo of a sunrise from Sonoma. Last week, he sent me a picture of his daughter, newborn, soft, and red-cheeked, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. "Her name is Alara," he wrote. "It's been a storm, but we're finding the calm. I don't ask if he and Sienna got back together. I don't need to know. What I see in his eyes in that photo is a kind of truth that no performance can fake. He's present. Not perfect, not repaired, but present. And that's more than most people ever become after betrayals. For Ethan, I heard he left Asheville a few months ago. Word is he tried to start fresh in Charleston, but jobs have been scarce. One of our mutual friends mentioned he lost a big client after the story of his affair leaked through the professional grapevine. I didn't ask for details. I don't need to know how his life is unfolding. I'm no longer waiting to see if he's sorry. He probably is. But regret isn't redemption. It's just a stop on the way to wherever you're willing to look yourself in the mirror again. We saw each other once more. At a charity gala in Boston, of all places. I was attending as a guest of one of my clients. He stood across the ballroom, holding a glass of wine he didn't seem to want. When he noticed me, his posture shifted. He walked over slowly, hesitantly, like someone approaching a grave. "Ava," he said, voice low. "You look..." "Well, I am well," I answered. He nodded, eyes glossy. "I'm sorry for all of it." I smiled gently, not out of warmth but clarity. "You don't have to say it. That chapter's over." And just like that, he nodded and walked away. No scene. No plea. Just two people who had once shared everything, now sharing nothing but air in a crowded room. I drove home that night with the windows down, my playlist soft and a little melancholy, filled with the songs Ethan once called too emotional. Florence Welch's Dog Days Are Over came on, and I didn't skip it. I turned it up. I let it fill the car, let the wind knot my hair, let the lyrics carry me through the quiet truth of it all. Because here's the thing about pain. It can either bury you or build you. I've learned to let it build me. These days, I journal more. I read again. I've even picked up photography, not to rival Ethan, but to reclaim what he once claimed to own. My photos are quieter, more intimate. A grandmother reading on a bench, a dog curled beside a child. The ocean at 5:42 a.m. when it still hasn't made up its mind about what kind of day it's going to be. I've written letters to my younger self, the one who thought marriage meant endurance, the one who believed that silence was the cost of maturity, the one who stayed up at night wondering why someone who said he loved her could still make her feel invisible. I've told her the truth. You're not hard to love. You just loved someone who never saw you clearly enough to realize you were already everything. I don't seek love now, not because I'm bitter, but because I'm whole. If someone comes along, they'll have to meet me as I am, unedited, steady, and unafraid of solitude. Last week, a client asked me what my greatest accomplishment has been. I paused for a long time before answering. Learning to leave without needing to be begged to stay, I said. Because there's a kind of freedom that comes only when you stop waiting for closure from the person who broke you, a kind of quiet power that arrives when you realize you are your own closure. Every morning in my cottage, I open all the windows, even when it's cold. I let the air cleanse the silence. I drink my tea slowly. I sit barefoot on the porch, listening to the gulls, the waves, the wind threading through the pine trees. And I remind myself of the life I've built, not out of survival, but of choice. Some people think stories like mine are tragedies, but they're wrong. This isn't a story of betrayal. It's a story of awakening. It's a story about the moment you realize you're not the abandoned one. You're the one who chose the door, stepped through it, and didn't look back. You're the one who saved yourself, and that is the most radical kind of love there is. Ava Morgan's story wasn't about infidelity. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about awakening, about what happens when the veil finally lifts, and the version of your life you've spent years trying to protect disintegrates in front of you. In the beginning, Ava was the quintessential woman who had it all: career success, a stable marriage, a well-designed life. But what looked like success on the surface was quietly eroding underneath. Her husband, Ethan, a man she had once trusted with her whole self, was living a lie so calculated it unfolded like a second life, one that included love letters, weekend escapes, and another woman who, ironically, was also married and betraying her own vows. But Ava did not fall apart when she found out. She did not scream or throw dishes or make a scene. Instead, she chose clarity over chaos. She chose evidence over assumption. And she chose to reclaim her narrative with poise, intelligence, and unshakable calm. When she met Julian Hale, Sienna's husband and the other person unknowingly entangled in this betrayal, it marked the beginning of an extraordinary alliance. Two strangers united by heartbreak, who together made a decision not to destroy, but to expose. They didn't confront their spouses with rage. They simply showed up. Present. Quiet. Holding space for the truth to speak for itself. What followed was not a dramatic explosion, but a slow, devastating unraveling of everything their partners had tried to conceal. The lies, the financial secrets, the manipulation, the baby Sienna was now carrying, all came to light. And when it did, Ava chose the one thing most people are too scared to choose when betrayed: release. She walked away, with dignity, with strength, with a signed divorce agreement and a soul no longer weighed down by someone else's dishonesty. She didn't just move on. She rebuilt, in her own way, in her own time, on her own terms. From a lonely housewife quietly brushing her teeth beside a lying husband, Ava became a woman who now lives by the sea in a small, peaceful cottage. She's helping other women through financial transitions post-divorce. She writes, she photographs, she breathes. She no longer waits for someone to choose her, because she finally chose herself. Julian, too, found his own version of healing. While still processing the grief of betrayal, he stepped up to father the child born from brokenness. Not out of Blind forgiveness, but out of responsibility and integrity. Because some men, even when betrayed, still choose compassion over destruction. That's a quiet form of heroism most people overlook. This story wasn't about punishing anyone. It wasn't even about getting answers. It was about ending a cycle of silence. About two people deciding that they would be the ones to change the narrative. Not for the cheaters, but for themselves. Ava's journey is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away, not to escape, but to evolve. You don't need closure from someone who shattered you. You need courage to close the door yourself, and you don't need to retaliate to prove your worth. You prove it every day you choose peace over permission, healing over habit, and honesty over history. So what can we learn from Ava's story? The most powerful lesson is this: you are not obligated to keep participating in a life that no longer honors your value. If something feels wrong, if your instincts whisper that trust is being eroded, listen. Don't wait for chaos. Don't wait for permission. Trust yourself enough to investigate, to question, and if necessary, to leave. And when betrayal comes, don't think you have to react with fire. Sometimes the most powerful response is presence. Ava didn't have to destroy Ethan or scream at Sienna to make her point. She simply stood in her truth and let the liars destroy themselves, and you can do the same. In your life, in your relationships, in any situation where your peace is threatened, because peace isn't passive, it's a decision. And Ava chose hers. Quiz time. Comment below. If you were in Ava's shoes, what would your first instinct be after discovering the truth? A. Leave immediately and confront the partner face to face. B. Stay quiet, gather proof, and plan a calm exposure like Ava did. Comment A or B below. I want to hear how you would handle it. What about you? Have you ever been in a situation like this? What would you have done differently? Or what lesson from Ava's story resonated most with you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. If you found Ava's story powerful, emotional, or meaningful, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to bring more deeply human stories to life. Stories that speak to real pain, real strength, and the kind of growth that only comes from fire. We've got more coming. Stories that will move you, shake you, and remind you you're not alone, and you are stronger than you think.